Two significant things happened in my life in the fall of 1957. First, I moved away from my family's home in Montebello to a small studio apartment in Hollywood to begin my freshman year as a music major at Los Angeles City College. Second, my parents separated and got a divorce. My mother keeping our house with my two younger siblings, Julika, 11 years old, and my youngest brother, Leslie, age 7. My dad, Julio Sr., found an apartment about a mile away. They shared custody of my brother and sister. About twice a week, I called home, generally talking to my sister Julika, who told me how my family was getting along, particularly my mom, Maria. Throughout my life, I considered her to be the most unhappy person I knew. Born in Puerto Rico, she was sent to New York in 1931 at age 12 by her mother to get married to a man selected by her sister, Tatin. She arrived and they wed the same day. His name was Enrique Reyes. 1 year later, in 1932, my half-brother George was born. A year after that, in 1933, my second brother, Harry, was born. Enrique deserted my mother in 1934. My mother supported herself as best she could during the Depression years. She joined both the Communist Party and the American Nazi Party because both distributed free food at their meetings. And my mom even entered marathon dancing competitions whenever Tatin agreed to babysit my two brothers. My mom wasn't a good dancer, but she could follow, and she had strong legs. It was in the dance floor that my future dad, Julio Martinez, appeared. He was a phenomenal dancer. Working as a bookkeeper during the day, he didn't just dance the marathon contests. He did dance exhibitions with his partner, Concha. When marathon competition went out of favor, he entered dance contests at Roseland Ballroom on 52nd Street in Manhattan. My mother did too, teaming with whatever partner she could get. As I said, she couldn't dance that well, but she could follow anybody. In the spring of 1937, Roseland announced that the winner of the Latin dance competition would win a 2-week engagement with the Xavier Cugat Orchestra, which was the house band at the rooftop of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. My dad entered, and so did my mom and her partner. My dad won. My mother and her partner came in third, mainly because my mother had great Latin rhythm in her hips. My dad noticed and decided to dump Concha and went after Maria with her rhythmic legs. They rehearsed together and began dancing with Cugat's orchestra. When the 2 weeks were over, my dad asked Cugat to keep them on. If he did, he would do the bookkeeping for the orchestra for free. My parents danced with the Cugat Orchestra right up until World War II broke out, except for the summer of 1938 when I was born. My dad got drafted, spent 2 years at Fort MacArthur in San Pedro, then was discharged after 2 years because of a medical disorder. But just before his discharge, he got a job as a bookkeeper for the restaurant division of Wayland Drugstores in downtown LA. He went back to New York and informed my mother, that her dancing career was over and the family was moving to Los Angeles and he was going to be a middle-class businessman. My mother hated the idea, but my dad piled her and the 3 boys in a Trails Boys bus depot, and off we went for 7 days on a trip from Manhattan to downtown LA. When we arrived, my dad was appointed general manager of the soda fountain of Wayland's, and my dad declared he no longer was going to dance. He rented a house and began his slow, steady march to middle-class respectability, controlling every aspect of our move up the social ladder. Mom hated it, My mom hated everything about it. She hated California, Mexican food, house cleaning, and the idea of middle class. She wanted to dance. She complained constantly. She made my dad's life miserable at home. My dad repaid her by having sex with as many of his waitresses as he could. And after 20 years of this, they got divorced, even though they did manage to produce my younger sister and brother along the way. So during my freshman year, my sister would update me on how mom was doing. Not too well, said my sister. She prepared meals, got siblings off to school, and generally sat around the house drinking coffee and watching game shows on TV. Her favorite show was Queen for a Day. But by January 1958, my two older half-brothers who lived in Montebello began picking her up after they got off work when my dad would get custody of my younger siblings. 24-year-old George was a real estate salesman at the Rubidoo Realty, and 24-year-old Harry worked at the Goodyear Tire Factory, which later morphed into Citadel Shopping Complex. They were both Marines who had fought both ex-Marines who had fought in Korea. My brothers would take my mom to their hangout, the Patio Gardens in Montebello, where they had a lot of pals. They played pinball machines, shot pool. My brothers would gab with their pals, and my mom usually sat with a glass of wine and just watched the boys have fun. Occasionally, a group of the guys would sit with her. My mom wouldn't say much. She just sat and sat for wine, and she smiled. This went on for a few months. In the meantime, I had moved out of a single apartment into a boarding house directly across from LACC. There was a payphone, and people would call me. One day, I got a call from Mom. She never called me. Julio, I want you to come home Sunday. I make dinner. My mom was a terrible cook. I mean, she was really bad. My brothers who lived nearby would generally bring her takeout food. I said, why, Mom? Why? She just said sternly, Julio, you come. Your brothers will be there 6 o'clock, verdad? So 6 o'clock that Sunday, I sat with my brothers in my mom's living room while she puttered in the kitchen. Julia and Les were spending a weekend with my dad. What's up? I asked my brother. George shrugged. It's me. My brother Harry asked, is she cooking for dinner? Then my mother came out of the kitchen and uttered, I invite someone to dinner. Who? He asked. She deadpanned, Jack from Patio Gardens. George and Harry looked at each other in amazement. Jack? That strange guy who just sits at the bar and doesn't talk to anyone? He talks to me. I like him. I invite him to move into the house. George exploded. Mom, Jack's younger than I am. He's a machinist at Lockheed who mumbles when he talks. Mom added, he never cracks a joke. Harry added, he never cracks a joke. He's just a big blob who sits at the end of the bar. Mom replied, he talks to me. And then the doorbell rang. Mom answered, and in walked Jack. He saw my brothers and just nodded. This is my son, Julio, my mom said. He's in college. Jack nodded to me, put out his hand for a handshake. His hand felt lifeless. My mom put her arm around his waist. You all sit down. And she went back into the kitchen. Jack sat down, and for the first time, he smiled. I asked him, so Jack, you work at Lockheed. What do you do for fun? He smiled again. I collect guns. George exclaimed, what kind of guns? Antiques, he said, Derringers and some flintlocks. I am taking Mary out in a week to a firing range to teach her how to shoot. I uttered, Mary? You mean Maria, my mother? Yes, she wants me to call her Mary. Jack moved into my mother's house a year later, after her divorce from my father was final. They got married. He couldn't dance a step. My mother didn't care. My mother evolved to a woman who learned to cook. She became a good housekeeper. She and Jack wrote out their budget and paid their bills together. In fact, my mother became a middle-class housewife. One time I asked her, "What's the difference, Mom?" Mom looked at me and said, "Jack loves me." For relaxation, they went target shooting, and he took her camping. In contrast, my dad began dancing again. He went out dancing almost every other night. So, my mother's marriage lasted 30 years until she died. Jack passed away a year later. He couldn't seem to live without her. Thank you.
Yes.
Wow. Great story.
Really good.